Hello and welcome to Gateway Kids. How lovely it is to see all of your beautiful faces. I'd like to especially welcome those of you who have never joined us before. My name's Bex and I'm part of the Gateway Kids team. So I'm just wondering, how are you doing? How's your week going? Why don't you, after 3, shout out as loud as you can the highlight of your week, okay? Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that does sound really exciting. Looks like your parents have put a lot of time into planning some really fun things for you all. Now today we are going to be continuing with part 2 of the Joseph story. So last week we had a little bit of a break because we looked at Pentecost, but now we are back and looking at part 2. So last week I gave you a challenge of recapping Joseph part 1. So I wonder how many of you watched the video again? Some of you. How many read the story in the Bible? Now that's impressive. I'm pleased with you. And I wonder how many people done a little family quiz of what they could remember. Anyone remember what that fancy man's name was? The one who brought Joseph in Egypt? Potiphar, that was his name. Now to help you all remember, and those of you who may have accidentally forgotten to do the whole recap thing, I'm going to do a recap now. So, the story begins in Canaan. So this is the modern day Palestine, Syria and Israel in about 1600, 1700 BC. Joseph was a man and he was number 11 out of 12 brothers, and he had a dad called Jacob, and Joseph was Jacob's favourite son. And everyone knew this. All of his brothers knew this. And it was especially made clear when Jacob got the most beautiful, extravagant, colourful, expensive coat made for Joseph. His brothers weren't happy with him. They were jealous. They were angry. Why did their dad like him more than them? Another thing that the brothers used to get really annoyed at was the fact that Joseph would have these dreams, and in the dreams quite often Joseph appeared superior or better off than the brothers. So this made the brothers really grumble and really angry at Joseph. So they come up with a plan and they thought about killing Joseph, killing their own brother. But instead they didn't kill him, they put him in a well. I thought, we'll leave him here for a bit, you know, see what happens. And then they saw some travellers going by and they thought, we could get some money out of this. We'll sell our brother to these travellers. So that's what they did. So Joseph was off to Egypt with his new owners, and the brothers wore their smug, ha ha ha, we have got rid of Joseph. And they ripped up his coat and they put goat's blood all over it. And they went back to the dad and was like, oh Dad, our brother, we don't know what happened. But the brothers did know. They sold him. And Joseph's dad, Jacob, he was heartbroken. He sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and he didn't know what to do with himself without Joseph. Then, when Joseph got to Egypt, the people that had bought him decided to sell him on, and they sold him to a very important rich man named Potiphar. And Potiphar liked Joseph. Potiphar gave favour to Joseph because of God. Potiphar could see that Joseph was a man of God, and so gave him responsibility and gave him lots of things to look after. But Potiphar had a wife, and she was a bit of a cheeky, naughty wife, and she wanted Joseph to cuddle and kiss her. And Joseph said no, and he decided to try and avoid her. But one day he was the only male present, and she snuck up on him and was like, Jojo, come and give me a kiss and a cuddle. And Joseph said no and ran. He wanted to get out of there. But Potiphar's wife waited for Potiphar to get home, and she turned the whole story around, and she told Potiphar that Joseph was after her, and Joseph tried cuddling and kissing her. She lied to her own husband. So Potiphar was fuming. He was so angry. So he decided to throw Joseph in jail. And this wasn't just any jail. This was like the royal, like the Pharaoh's jail. Whilst Joseph was in prison, he met 2 other inmates, and he also got lots of favour in the prison. The guards liked him. They saw that he was a good, godly man, so they let him look after the other prisoners. So 2 of these men, one was a butler and one was a baker, and one day they both had dreams and they didn't understand what they meant. So Joseph said, well, I, could talk to God and ask him what he wants to tell you with these dreams. So both of them told him their dreams, and Joseph told them what they meant. So for the baker, unfortunately, it meant that Pharaoh was going to kill him. But for the butler, it was that Pharaoh was going to release him and he'll be back in his position. And Joseph said, particularly to the butler, he said, look, please show me kindness. Please show me kindness. Tell them that I'm in prison. Tell Pharaoh that I'm here. Please don't forget about me. But the butler did. So that's where we left it. Joseph was in prison. The butler had forgotten about him. The baker had died. His dad thought that he was dead, and his brothers were all happy to have seen him go. So now we're going to go on to part 2. So part 2 starts 2 years after. 2 years later, and Joseph was in prison for the whole 2 years. The butler hadn't remembered him. One night, Pharaoh had a dream, and in his dream, he saw 7 fat, smooth and shiny cows come out of the river Nile. But then he saw 7 ugly, skinny cows come out of the Nile. So the Nile's a big river. And then all of a sudden, the 7 skinny, ugly cows started eating the big, fat, shiny cows. And Potiphar woke up, but he didn't know what this meant. But he was able to roll over and go back to sleep. Now, when he was asleep, he had a second dream. Now, this second dream, there was wheat. So wheat is like grass, it grows up. And in his dream, there was one piece of wheat and it had 7 really healthy looking heads. It was beautiful, it was wonderful. But then another bit of wheat come up and there were 7 really shriveled and dried bits of wheat. And then the thin heads of the wheat, the ones that had been burnt by the sun and were all scrawny, started eating up the healthy, wonderful, normal bits of wheat. And Pharaoh woke up again and he was so confused. He did not know what was going on. He couldn't understand what these dreams meant. So he decided to call all the magicians in the kingdom to come and tell him what his dreams meant. And he asked all the wise men and all the people that have like dream interpretations, come and tell me my dream. Now Pharaoh told all of them his dream. He took time telling them about the cows and the wheat, but none of them knew what it meant. Then the chief butler, the cupbearer, he remembered. And he went to Pharaoh and he said, hey Pharaoh, you remember that time I was in prison? Yeah, well actually I met a guy in prison and his name was Joseph. And when I was in prison, I had this dream and I didn't know what it meant. But I spoke to Joseph and he said that his God told him what the dream meant. And it came true. Joseph told me I was going to be let out of prison. And look, here I am. So Pharaoh ordered that this Joseph from prison would be brought to him. So after Joseph had a good shave, changed his clothes and got ready, he was invited to meet Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, Joseph, I've had these 2 dreams and no one, and I mean no one, can tell me what they mean. So I was wondering whether I could tell you and you can tell me what they mean. And Joseph said, I can't do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answers he desires. So Pharaoh took the time explaining the 2 dreams, and he began with the dream about the cows, and he explained to Joseph that he saw 7 healthy, fat, shiny cows come out of the river, and then he saw 7 skinny, ugly cows come out of the river. And then all of a sudden the skinny cows ate the fat, juicy, shiny cows. Pharaoh then went on to explain about the wheat and how he saw 7 blades, 7 heads of beautiful wheat, and they were glorious and they looked really tasty, but then 7 scrawny, shrivel up, wind-burnt bits also grew up next to them, and then before he knew it, they started eating the good, healthy wheat. He was at a loss. He was begging Joseph for answers. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, God is saying that these 2 dreams are basically the same. God's message is the same in both the dream about the cows and the dream about the wheat. The 7 fat, juicy, shiny cows and the 7 healthy, yummy blades of wheat, they represent 7 years. And the 7 skinny, ugly cows and the 7 scrawny, wind-burnt bits of wheat, they also represent 7 years. Then Joseph continued and he said there will be 7 years with lots of harvest. Egypt will be able to put seed down and loads of food come up. So much food, many people will be able to enjoy it. But then after these really good, wonderful years of good crops, there will be a famine. Now, famine means that there's no food, food can't grow, and people will not have enough. They'll go hungry. And that's what the 2 sevens represent. The healthy cows and the healthy wheat, 7 good years of harvest. And then the 7 skinny ugly cows and the 7 scrawny bit of wheat will represent the 7 years of famine. Then Joseph said, God's shown you, Pharaoh, what his plan is. There'll be 7 years of great abundance. There'll be so much food. But then, when the famine comes, people will forget how good the 7 good years were and instead be miserable and grumpy about the 7 bad years. Now, Pharaoh, the reason that God gave you 2 dreams was to assure you that that is what he's going to do. It's to reinforce that that is God's plan. And he will do it soon. And Pharaoh, you need to find a man. You need to find a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land. What you should do, Pharaoh, is appoint places to keep some of the crop, 1/5 of the crop from every year of the good years. So we'll save up enough food for the bad years. The grain should be stored under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. You should do this, Pharaoh, so that the people of Egypt will not suffer, that they will still be able to live and survive even through the worst famine ever. Pharaoh and the officials, they all like this plan. Yeah, sounds good. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find someone like this good man here, in whom the Spirit of God lives in? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has told you his plan, since you've been able to understand what my dreams mean, I'm going to put you in charge. There is no one as wise and as discerning as you. You should be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. You know, they could see God working in Joseph's life. It was so clear to see. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in order of all of the land of Egypt. He took off his signet ring and gave it to Joseph. Then he dressed Joseph in the finest, richest robes, and he put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot, That's like a very, very fancy cart that a horse or horses would pull. So Pharaoh put him in one of those as his second in command. And people shouted for him, "Make way! Make way! He has been put in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but unless you say that it's right and it's a good thing to do, no one will lift a hand or a foot in Egypt." And Pharaoh gave Joseph a special name, Zaphenath-Paneah. And not only that, he gave Joseph a bride, a wife, and her name was Asenath. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Now, how incredible is that? In part 2, Joseph has gone from being in prison for over 2 years, because he was in prison even before the butler got out, to now being like the second in command Pharaoh. Now Pharaoh is like the king of the whole country. He is the real deal. He is like the queen. It's literally like the queen calling you up in jail and being like, "Hello, I need your help." And you'd be like, "Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. God's got me." And then the queen be like, "Yep, you're going to be second in command." How incredible. And that is all because of God. Because Joseph was obedient, because he waited on God, because the Spirit of God lived in his heart, he could do all things. Even in the toughest times, God was still with him, and God was still with him when he was made second in command, when he was recognised as being a strong, wise, discerning man of God. God gave him good things because of his obedience. Now we can apply this to our lives. As friends of Jesus, we should try and be like Joseph. Everything that Joseph did, his actions, his behaviours, showed people God. It said that he was filled with the Spirit of God. And in our own actions, in our own lives, we want to show others how good God is and how God is using our lives for his glory. Our lives, we can sometimes be up here and be really happy and really joyful, and sometimes we can be down here and we can feel a bit low and a bit sad. And sometimes we can be a bit like this, a bit like wobbly jelly. But no matter what, no matter where we're at, we need to trust in God. We need to spend time with our Father. We need to spend time reading the Word and praying to him and asking him for his Holy Spirit. With God, we can do all things, just like Joseph did. Now, the story of Joseph doesn't end there. There is more. So be sure to tune in next week, and we'll be looking at the 3rd section of the Joseph story. Now in the Bible there isn't actually 3 parts, that is just how I've broken it up to spread it over the Gateway Kids week. So why don't you this week recap over what we looked at in part 1, recap over what we looked at in part 2, and be ready for next week, ready to see what happens with Joseph in power, a position of power over Egypt. I hope you have a wonderful week. Stay safe. Bye.